have thought about this for years. I have thought about the rope. I have thought about what it means that he chose the rope instead of the door handle. I have thought about what he was planning that required me to be unable to get out through that door rather than him simply walking through it. I have never arrived at an answer that gives me peace. This happened when I was 15 years old, in the summer, on a Thursday afternoon that had been so ordinary up to that point that I had genuinely forgotten I was home alone. We lived in a rural area, the kind of rural where neighbors are measured in fields rather than houses, where the nearest town was a 20-minute drive on a road that did not get much traffic, where the idea of a stranger approaching your home on foot was something you considered about as often as you considered being struck by lightning. Our house sat at the end of a gravel driveway, set back from the road, surrounded on 3 sides by open land. It was the kind of property where you could see anyone coming from a long way off. Or at least that was what we had always believed. My parents had gone into town that morning. I had been awake since 8, had eaten breakfast, had spent most of the day in my room reading and listening to music, the full luxurious expanse of a summer Thursday with no obligations and no schedule. The house was quiet. The afternoon was hot. Our dog, a large calm shepherd mix named Reuben, had been sleeping in the shade on the back porch most of the day. I was in my room when Reuben started barking. Not his warning bark. Not the sharp alert sound he made when a car came down the driveway or a deer moved along the tree line at the edge of the property. This was something lower and more sustained, the kind of sound he made when something was wrong in a way he could not fully articulate. I went to my window and looked out. The driveway was empty. The front of the property was empty. I could not see anything from that angle that explained the sound. I went to the hallway and looked out the window that faced the back and the side of the house. I could see Reuben at the edge of the back porch facing toward the front corner of the house, still making that sound. And I could see a man. He was walking along the side of the house toward the front deck. Not running, not sneaking. Walking with a kind of calm deliberateness. The way a person walks when they have a destination and they know where it is. He was a stranger. I did not recognize him from any angle, and in a rural area where unfamiliar faces were genuinely uncommon, I would have recognized him if I had seen him before. He was carrying something. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. He was carrying our dog's rope leash, the one we kept on a hook by the back door, the one we used for walks along the road when we wanted Reuben on lead. He had it coiled over one shoulder. I watched him walk to the front deck. I watched him go to the main entrance, the wide front door that opened inward onto the entryway. I watched him thread the rope through the door handle and pull it back to the railing of the deck and tie it. Not quickly, not frantically, carefully, deliberately, with the calm movements of someone who had decided exactly what they were going to do and was doing it. He then picked up the mop that was kept beside the outside wall of the house and leaned it at an angle against the door, the handle braced under the doorknob, adding resistance on top of the rope. I stood in the hallway watching all of this through the window, and I did not fully process what I was seeing. My brain was attempting to construct an explanation that made sense and could find none. He was not breaking in. He was doing the opposite. He was making it so the door could not be opened from the inside. He was making it so that if someone was in the house and tried to leave through that door, they could not. I remember the exact moment that understanding landed, the cold of it, the complete biological response of a body that has just understood something that the rational mind is still trying to reject. I did not think. I moved. I went to my room and grabbed my phone, and I went through the hallway to the back of the house, away from the front deck, away from him, to the side door that led from the laundry room to the side yard. I went out that door. I ran to the far side of the property, to the tree line at the back where there was a dense cluster of old oaks, and I crouched down in the undergrowth and I called my parents. My mother answered. I told her what I had seen. She told me to stay where I was, and she called the police and then called me back to stay on the line. I stayed in those trees for 25 minutes. I could see the front of the house from where I was. I watched the man try the front door from outside. I watched him realize the door was also locked from inside. The additional deadbolt that we kept engaged, the one that required a key from either direction. I watched him stand on the deck for a moment. I watched him leave. He walked back up the driveway toward the road and out of sight. The police arrived 14 minutes after that. They checked the property. They found no one. They found the rope still tied to the deck railing, the mop still braced against the door. They found evidence that he had walked around the perimeter of the house before approaching the front, marks in the soft ground along the flower bed at the side. He had been circling the house before I saw him. For how long, I do not know. And here is the thing that has never left me. When the officer untied the rope and tested the door, he noted something in his report that my mother told me about weeks later. The front door had not been locked at the deadbolt. Only the interior handle lock was engaged, which can be turned from inside. The rope and the mop were not there to keep me from unlocking the door. They were there to prevent me from pulling it open quickly, to slow me down, to buy time. For what, in those slowed down seconds, I was supposed to be unable to do or someone was supposed to be able to do? That is the question I have carried with me. We never found out who he was. We never found out how he had come to be on our property on that Thursday afternoon. We never found out where he went or what he intended. The investigation produced nothing. The rope stayed in my mind long after everything else faded. Not the man, not his face or his walk. The rope, the patient, deliberate way he tied it, the way he knew exactly what he was doing and did it without rushing, as if he had rehearsed, as if he had done this before. I want to be precise about the snow because precision is the only thing that makes this story make sense. When I say fresh snow, I mean the kind of complete, unbroken white surface that accumulates overnight and sits undisturbed until something walks on it. I mean a foot of it, at minimum, covering the deck in a single smooth layer with no marks, no animal tracks, no disturbance of any kind. This is important because it means there is no ambiguity about timing. If something walked on that deck, it walked on it after the snowfall stopped. And I know exactly when the snowfall stopped because I had been in the house all day and I had watched it stop. I was staying alone at a family friend's cabin in upstate New York, a long weekend in January. I was 22, in my last year of university, and the cabin's owner, a friend of my parents who I had known my whole life, had offered it to me when he heard me mention needing somewhere quiet to work on my thesis. The cabin was remote, not inaccessibly remote, but deeply rural. The nearest town was about 12 miles on a road that wound through forest, and the nearest neighbor was a farmhouse set far back off the road that I had seen in passing but not visited. The cabin sat at the edge of a clearing with a large back deck facing the woods that began about 40 feet from the railing. Dense mixed forest, the kind that closes in fast and goes dark early. I had arrived Friday evening. By Saturday morning, there was serious snow on the ground and more falling, and I had settled into the deep, productive quiet of a person alone in a remote place with meaningful work and no distractions. I had the cabin's dog with me, a large older lab named Chester who belonged to the owner and had been left in my care for the weekend. Chester was good company, calm, unhurried, the kind of dog that communicates in glances rather than noise. Saturday was completely peaceful. I worked all morning. The snow stopped around 3 in the afternoon. I made dinner early, ate at the kitchen table with Chester at my feet, washed up. By 8 I was tired and thinking about bed. It was getting ready for bed that did it. I was moving through the cabin, turning off lights for the night, doing the rounds that become automatic in unfamiliar houses, checking that the front door was locked, checking the windows, checking the back. The back of the cabin opened onto the deck through a large sliding glass door. I went to the slider to check the lock and I looked out through the glass. The deck light was on. It had a motion sensor that activated at dusk. The deck was white and still and lit up clearly in the yellow cast of the light, and it was covered in footprints. My mind refused the image for a full second. Just refused it, the way a program stalls before producing an error. Then the image resolved into meaning and my whole body went cold. Footprints in the fresh snow, multiple sets. They came out of the tree line, across the 40 feet of clearing between the woods and the deck, up the 3 steps, and then, this is the part that held me longest, all over the deck. Not just up to the door, all over it. Back and forth across the full width and length of the deck, the way a person moves when they are looking at something from multiple angles, from multiple windows, and then they went back down the steps and back across the clearing and into the trees. I stood at the slider for a long time. The deck was empty. The clearing was empty. The snow beyond the deck was undisturbed except for those tracks, which were clear and deep and recent enough not to have any new fill in them. Chester was beside me. I looked down at him. He was looking out at the deck with his ears forward and his body very still, the stillness of a dog that is paying close attention to something beyond the range of human perception. I did not open the slider.
I made sure the lock was fully engaged and I checked it 3 times, and then I went to the front door and checked that, and I turned on every light in the cabin.
I called the owner. He picked up on the second ring and I told him what I had found. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked me to describe the tracks in detail, the size, the pattern, the depth. I described them. He was quiet again. He said he would call a neighbor who lived further down the road, a man who knew the property and the surrounding land, and ask him to drive out and check on me. The neighbor arrived about 40 minutes later. He walked around the full perimeter of the cabin with a flashlight. He confirmed the tracks on the deck. He followed them back across the clearing to the tree line and stood there with his flashlight for a long time. When he came back to the door, he told me the tracks went into the trees for about 30 feet, and then he lost them. The snow was thinner under the canopy, and the trail broke up. He said he could not determine what had made them. He said the size and the spacing were consistent with a large person. He said nothing else about it. He offered to stay, but I could tell he was uncomfortable, and I told him I was fine. I was not fine. I spent the night on the couch nearest the front door with every light in the cabin burning and Chester pressed against my legs and a kitchen knife on the cushion beside me. I left at first light. I have thought about those tracks many times since. About whoever or whatever stood on that deck in the dark and moved from window to window, looking in at the lit cabin, at me moving through the rooms, at Chester lying by the fire. About how long they stood there before they turned around and went back into the trees. About whether they watched me turn off the lights one by one. About whether they were still out there in the dark when the last light went out. Chester knew. He had known before I looked. That is what I come back to on the bad nights. That is what I come back to on the bad nights. He was already looking at the deck before I got there. He had already known something was out there, and he had stayed very quiet, as if he understood that making noise was not the right choice. I am going to tell you this exactly as it happened, and I am not going to speculate about what it was because I do not have a speculation that holds. I have tried every rational explanation. I have tried them seriously over years with the specific determination of someone who does not want to believe what they saw. Not one of them accounts for all of the facts simultaneously. This happened in January a few years back. I lived alone at the end of a private driveway about half a mile off the main road in rural Appalachia. No neighbors within visible distance. The only building near mine was an abandoned apartment complex set back on the adjacent lot, unused for years, its windows dark and its parking lot empty. It was the kind of isolation that suited me. I had chosen it deliberately, valued the quiet, had lived there for 2 years without incident. I had 2 dogs, large animals, trained and reliable, not given to false alarms. That January night was a heavy snowfall. It had been coming down hard since late afternoon, the thick, dense kind that muffles sound and piles fast, and by 9 in the evening there was serious accumulation on the ground. Everything outside was white and still and completely quiet in the particular way that heavy snowfall creates, a blanketed, absorbed silence. My phone had died during the day, and I had been looking for the charger for a couple of hours, not urgently, when I heard the dogs. Both of them, standing at the back windows, facing outward, not barking in the sharp alert way, but in a sustained low way that I had not heard from either of them before. That sound was the first signal. I went to the back windows and looked out. The yard was white and undisturbed. No tracks, nothing visible. I told the dogs to settle, and they did not settle. Then the knocking started, at the front door. Powerful, not a knock in the ordinary sense of the word, not a person's knuckle on wood. This was the sound of something striking the door with significant force, the kind of impact that shook the frame. I went to the front door and looked through the glass panel beside it. The porch was empty. I turned on the porch light. Nothing. No one there, no movement, no tracks in the snow on the porch steps. I stood at the front door and listened. The knocking moved to the back door. The back of the house had a glass panel door with a motion detector light above it. I went to that side of the house. The motion detector had not triggered. The light above the door was off. I looked through the glass. Nobody there. The snow beneath the back door step was undisturbed. And then both doors were struck simultaneously, front and back at once. Powerful, deliberate blows that shook both frames at the same moment. I stepped back from the back door. My hands were shaking. My mind was working very hard to find the explanation that made both doors happen at once with a single person and could not construct one. The distances involved were too great. I went to the center of the house and I stood there. Then it moved to the windows. First floor windows, in sequence, working around the house. Each one struck with the same force, the same deliberateness. I went to the gun case. I had a shotgun, kept loaded for exactly this kind of situation, living alone and remote as I did. I took it out. I moved through the house, closing all the curtains so that whatever was outside could not see where I was. The knocking continued. Around the first floor, methodical, moving from window to window without pause. Then it went up. Second floor windows. The kind of windows that are 10, 12 feet off the ground. The kind that require a ladder or significant height to reach from outside. I stood in the upstairs hallway with the shotgun and I listened to something strike the second floor windows one by one, and I could not breathe properly. I called my mother because my cell phone had charged just enough to turn back on. She answered. I told her what was happening. She told me not to call the police unless someone tried to get inside. She thought it was local kids. I did not argue with her because arguing would have required me to explain things I could not yet fully articulate. After about 20 minutes it stopped. Complete silence. The dogs had gone quiet too. They were sitting in the center of the room, pressed together, watching the walls. I waited until I was completely certain of the silence. Then I unlocked the front door and stepped onto the porch. The snow on the porch steps was untouched. I walked around the full perimeter of the house. No footprints, not one. A foot of undisturbed snow against every wall, against every window, beneath every door. No ladder marks, no depressions. Nothing that indicated anything physical had been there. The knocking had moved from door to door and window to window, including windows 12 feet above the ground, and had left no evidence of any kind in the snow below. I went back inside and I locked the door and I sat on the couch with the shotgun across my knees until morning. I still live there. Nothing like it has happened since. I have no explanation. I have tried everyone I can think of. Wind does not knock. Animals do not reach second floor windows. People leave footprints. Whatever was outside my house that night left nothing behind except the sound. And the dogs, both of them still in the center of the room, still watching the walls long after the sound had stopped, as if they knew that silence was not the same thing as gone. This is a story about certainty, about the specific horror of being completely certain of something that the evidence around you refuses to confirm, about lying awake for weeks afterward, running through the memory again and again, checking it from every angle, looking for the gap, the misremembering, the moment where your certainty was actually just assumption, and finding none. I was 23, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment in a college town in the Midwest for the first time in my life. I had graduated the previous spring and taken a job at a firm in that same town, partly because the job was good, and partly because the town was familiar, and the transition to genuine adult solitude was easier in a place I already knew. The apartment was on the second floor of a building with an interior access stairwell. You needed a key fob to get into the building from outside, and then a key for the apartment door. 2 layers of access control. It was, in theory, one of the safer configurations available to a young woman living alone in a university town. I was careful in ways that had become automatic. I locked the door every time I came in. Every time. Not usually, not mostly. Every time the key turned, the deadbolt engaged, and I tested the handle before I moved further into the apartment. This was not anxiety. This was simply the habit of someone who lived alone and understood that the habit mattered. The night this happened was a Tuesday in early October. I had been at work all day and come home tired, made dinner, watched something on my laptop, went to bed around 10:30. Before I got into bed, I did what I always did. I checked the front door. Deadbolt engaged. Handle tested. The specific click and solid resistance of a locked door. I went to bed. I woke up at some point in the early hours, needing the bathroom. Not unusual. I got up in the dark and went down the short hall and used the bathroom and came back out. And stopped. The front door was open. Not wide open. 6 inches, maybe 8. Just open. The deadbolt was not engaged. The handle was in the unlocked position. I stood in the hallway in the dark and I looked at that gap of darkness and cooler air coming through the open door, and I could not move for a full moment. The rational mind runs very fast in moments like that. Mine ran through everything it had available. I had not sleepwalked in my life. There was no wind event that could open a dead-bolted door. No one else had a key. The landlord had a master and was required by law to give notice before entry. I had not let anyone in. I had not left the apartment after coming home the previous evening. I forced myself to move. I went to the kitchen and got the largest knife I owned, and I went back to the front door and I opened it fully and looked into the hallway. Empty, lit by the dim emergency lighting that burned all night. No one. I checked the apartment systematically. Every room, every closet. Under the bed, behind the bathroom door, the space behind the water heater and the utility cupboard, no one. I was alone. I pushed the door shut and engaged the deadbolt and stood with my back against it. The deadbolt worked perfectly. The lock was functioning exactly as it should, which meant either I had not locked it before bed or it had been unlocked from the outside. And I knew I had locked it. That is the part that will not resolve. I ran through the memory of locking that door so many times in the weeks that followed that I began to distrust the memory, began to wonder if the repetition was wearing grooves in my recollection that were not accurate, began to wonder if the habit was so automatic that I had simply performed the motions in my mind without actually doing them. That is the comfortable explanation. And I cannot fully commit to it because what I remember is not just the motion. I remember the click, the specific resistance of the deadbolt engaging, the solid feel of a locked door when I tested the handle. I remember those things with the same clarity that I remember anything else from that evening. I reported it to the building manager the next morning. He checked the lock. He checked the building access logs. The logs showed no fob entry or exit during the night after mine at 7:40 in the evening. The lock was functioning correctly. He could not explain it. I had a locksmith come and rekey the deadbolt that same week, which did not address the question of how the original lock had been opened but felt like the only available response. The door was never open again. Nothing else happened. But I check the door now before I get into bed, and then I check it again when I wake in the night, and then I check it once more in the morning. 3 checks. Every day, because certainty has a different weight to it now, a heavier, more provisional weight. And because I know that what I remember from that night is not the feeling of forgetting, it is the feeling of having done the thing and finding out it made no difference. My brother and I have talked about this exactly once since it happened. We were adults by the time we talked about it, years removed. And even then, neither of us was comfortable giving it the space a real conversation would have required.
We said the facts.
We confirmed them to each other. We agreed that we both remembered it the same way. And then we moved on because the alternative was to sit with something that neither of us has a framework for. This happened on a Wednesday in March. My brother and I were home sick from school, a genuine illness, the kind that had kept us both up the previous night and produced a call to school from our mother before she left for work. We were 12 and 9 respectively, old enough to be left for a few hours without adult supervision, especially since our stepfather worked less than 20 minutes away and could be reached immediately if needed. Our mother left at her usual time, just past 8 in the morning. Our stepfather had already left before we woke up. The house was a 2-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood in the Northeast, a house I had grown up in from the age of 5, a house I knew completely. My brother and I had set up in the basement, which had a finished craft room where we kept a large flat table we used for building models. We were down there all morning. Quiet, mildly ill, not particularly interested in anything except the models and the low background comfort of each other's company. It was around noon. We heard the front door. Unmistakably the front door, the specific sound of that particular door, which had a heavier lock mechanism than most and produced a distinctive 2-part sound when it opened. The lock turning and then the hinges. We both heard it. We both looked at each other. We heard footsteps cross the tile of the entryway to the kitchen. Hard-soled footsteps, the sound of shoes on the tile that we heard every evening when our stepfather came home from the office. We heard the kitchen tap turn on, run for perhaps 30 seconds, turn off, and then the footsteps again, this time moving from the kitchen toward the staircase. My brother said he came home for lunch. He said it with the easy certainty of a child who has just organized unfamiliar information into the nearest familiar category. We called our mother. She answered within 2 rings. She had just gotten off a call with our stepfather, she said. He was in a meeting. He was at the office. He had been at the office all morning. She said this pleasantly with no particular alarm because we had given her no particular reason for alarm. We had framed it as a check-in, not a distress call. We hung up. I looked at my brother. He looked at me. And I heard from above us the sound of a footstep on the 2nd floor. Just one, then nothing. I will tell you what we did, and I will tell you that I am not particularly proud of it, though I am not sure any other choice was available to us. We did not move. We stayed in the basement craft room with the door pulled to. We did not speak. We listened with the specific full-body attention of children who understand, without being able to articulate why, that they should not be heard. We heard nothing else. No more footsteps, no door closing. No return movement on the stairs. After a period I cannot accurately measure. It felt very long and may have been 15 minutes or may have been 40. My brother took my hand and we went up the basement stairs and through the kitchen to the back door and out into the yard. We sat on the back step until our mother came home at 1:30, having been called by our stepfather when he couldn't reach us on the house phone. The police checked the house. It was locked and empty. Every window secure. The front door showing no sign of forced entry. The lock fully functional. The tap in the kitchen was dry, which our mother said meant no one had used it recently, but I have never been sure that is conclusive. I remember the sound of that tap. The specific sound of water running in our kitchen at noon on a Wednesday. My brother remembers it too. We confirmed this when we talked about it years later. Adults, sitting at a table with coffee going cold between us. He said, "I heard it." I said, "I know." He said, "It sounded exactly like him." I said, "I know." And then we found something else to talk about, because that was all there was to say. Someone came through our front door at noon on a Wednesday and walked to the kitchen and turned on the tap and went upstairs. And all the doors were locked from the inside when the police arrived. And my stepfather was in a meeting 20 minutes away the entire time. What was in our house that day, I cannot tell you. What it wanted, I cannot tell you. Why it sounded exactly like the footsteps of a man we knew. A particular rhythm, a particular weight, a particular way of moving through a house. I cannot tell you. I only know that we heard it, and that neither of us went back into that house alone again for a very long time. Not once. Not even to retrieve something we had forgotten. We always waited for someone else to be there first.